It's not easy to talk about, but I think it's time to get it off my chest. Maybe by telling my story, I'll find some sort of closure, or at least a better understanding of what happened. My name is Dan, and this is the story of how my wife Emily betrayed me. Emily and I met in college, at a small liberal arts school in Ohio. She was studying literature, always buried in some classic novel, while I was working on my degree in engineering. We were an odd pair from the start, her with her dreamy eyes and poetic musings, me with my pragmatic outlook and love for numbers. But somehow, we clicked. Maybe it was the balance we brought to each other, or maybe it was just that early, reckless kind of love that doesn't ask questions. We married young, right after graduation. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Everyone said we were the perfect couple. We moved to Chicago, where I got a job as a junior engineer at a firm that designed and built bridges. Emily found work at a small publishing house. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The first few years were good. We were both busy with our careers but made time for each other. We had this tiny apartment in Logan Square, which we filled with secondhand furniture and hand-me-downs from our parents. It wasn't much, but it was ours. We had dreams of moving into a house someday, starting a family, building a life together. Things started to change about 5 years into our marriage. I got a promotion, which meant more hours at work and more stress. I was managing projects now, big ones, with tight deadlines and high stakes. I was good at it, but it consumed me. I was always thinking about work, even when I was at home. Emily noticed, of course. She would complain that I was never around, that I didn't listen to her anymore, that I was always tired. She was right, but I didn't know what to do about it. I felt like I was doing what I needed to do to provide for us, to build that future we had talked about. Emily was restless too. Her job at the publishing house wasn't going anywhere. She was frustrated, feeling like she was stuck in a dead-end position while watching her friends from college move up in their careers. She started talking about going back to school, maybe getting a master's degree in creative writing. I supported the idea, but we both knew it would be a financial strain. Still, I encouraged her to look into it. I wanted her to be happy, and that's when she met him. His name was Mark, and he was a professor at the university where Emily was considering taking classes. He was older, in his 40s, with a kind of rugged charm that Emily found irresistible. They met at an open house event, and he took an interest in her right away. He was everything I wasn't: charismatic, artistic, a man who seemed to understand her in a way I couldn't. At first, she just talked about him in passing, how he had recommended some books she might like, how he had offered to help her with her application. I didn't think much of it. But then she started spending more and more time at the university, going to his office hours, attending events he was hosting. She seemed happier, more alive, and I told myself that this was a good thing. She needed something outside of our marriage to give her fulfillment. I was wrong. I should have seen the signs. But I was too wrapped up in my own world to notice. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way she would light up when she talked about him. It all came to a head one night, when I came home early from work. I had planned to surprise her, to take her out to dinner at her favorite restaurant. But when I walked through the door, I found her sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands, crying. I asked her what was wrong, but she wouldn't look at me. She just kept saying she was sorry, over and over again. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I asked her if it was about Mark, and she finally nodded. She told me that she had been seeing him, that it had started out as just a friendship but had turned into something more. She said she didn't mean for it to happen, but that she couldn't help herself. She had fallen in love with him. I didn't know what to say. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. This was the woman I had built my life around, the person I had trusted more than anyone. Dear viewers, more than 90% watch my content without subscribing. If you still have not subscribed, then I ask you to do so. For me, this is the best motivation to continue. And she had betrayed me. I left the apartment, got into my car, and just drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. I ended up at a bar on the other side of town. It was a dingy place, the kind of place where no one asks questions. I sat at the bar and ordered a drink, then another, trying to drown the pain that was tearing me apart. I don't remember much of that night. just that I felt completely and utterly lost. The next few days were a blur. Emily and I didn't talk much. She moved into the guest room, and we tiptoed around each other like strangers. I couldn't stand to look at her, but I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to fight for our marriage, to find a way to fix things. But another part of me was so angry, so hurt, that I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. I threw myself into my work, spending long hours at the office to avoid going home. My coworkers noticed that something was wrong, but I didn't confide in anyone. I couldn't bear the thought of people knowing what had happened, of seeing the pity in their eyes. I felt like a failure, like I had let this happen. Emily continued to see Mark. She didn't try to hide it anymore, and I didn't ask. I knew our marriage was over, but I wasn't ready to face it. It was easier to pretend that things might somehow go back to the way they were. But deep down, I knew that was impossible. One night, about a month after I found out about the affair, Emily sat me down and told me she wanted a divorce. She said she was sorry, that she hadn't meant to hurt me, but that she couldn't see a way forward for us. She said she loved Mark and wanted to be with him. I felt a wave of anger and sadness crash over me, but I didn't argue. What was the point? Our marriage was already in ruins. The divorce process was painful. We had to sort through all the details of our life together, dividing up our possessions, our finances, our memories. It felt like ripping off a Band-Aid, exposing all the raw, painful wounds underneath. I moved out of our apartment and found a small place of my own. It was lonely, but at least it was mine. I tried to move on with my life, but it was hard. Everywhere I went, I saw reminders of Emily, of the life we had built together. I couldn't escape the memories, the sense of loss. I started seeing a therapist, hoping it would help me make sense of everything. She told me that it was okay to grieve, that it was normal to feel the way I did. But I didn't want to feel that way. I wanted to be angry, to blame Emily and Mark for everything. It was easier than facing the pain. Slowly, I started to rebuild my life. I focused on my work, took on new projects, and tried to stay busy. I reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with over the years. I started going to the gym, trying to take better care of myself. It was a slow process, but little by little, I began to feel like myself again. One day, about 6 months after the divorce, I got a call from an old friend from college. His name was Jack, and we had been close back in the day. He told me he was moving to Chicago for a new job and wanted to catch up. I agreed, glad for the distraction. We met up at a bar downtown, and it was like no time had passed at all. We talked and laughed, reminiscing about our college days. Jack had always been the life of the party, and it was good to be around someone who could make me forget about my troubles for a while. He asked about Emily, and I told him the whole story. He listened, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, man," he said. "That's rough. But you know what? You're better off without her. You deserve someone who appreciates you, who won't take you for granted." His words stuck with me. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was a chance for a fresh start, to find someone who truly loved me. I decided to take his advice to heart. I started putting myself out there again, going to social events, trying to meet new people. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I felt like giving up, but I kept at it. And then, one day, I met Sarah. She was a friend of a friend, someone I had seen at a few gatherings but never really talked to. We ended up sitting next to each other at a dinner party, and we just clicked. She was funny, smart, and had a way of making me feel at ease. We started talking, and before I knew it, hours had passed. We started dating, and it was like a breath of fresh air. Sarah was everything I had been missing, everything I hadn't even realized I needed. She was patient, understanding, and supportive. She didn't try to rush things, didn't push me to forget about Emily. Instead, she helped me see that it was okay to let go, to move on. It's been 2 years since my divorce, and I'm in a much better place now. I'm still working at the engineering firm, but I've taken on a new role that allows me to have a better work-life balance. I've reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and found a sense of peace I didn't think was possible. Sarah and I are still together, and while I'm not rushing into anything, I can see a future with her. Looking back, I realize that Emily's betrayal was the catalyst for a lot of positive changes in my life. It forced me to reevaluate my priorities, to take a hard look at myself and what I wanted. It was a painful lesson, but one that ultimately made me stronger. So that's my story. It's not a happy one, but it's mine. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that life has a way of surprising you, of giving you second chances when you least expect them. You just have to be willing to take them. As Sarah and I grew closer, I found myself slowly letting go of the past. It wasn't that I forgot about Emily and what happened, but the pain started to dull, replaced by a cautious optimism about the future. Sarah had this way of making even the mundane feel special. We would spend lazy Sunday mornings wandering through farmers' markets, finding quirky little cafes, and talking about everything and nothing. Sarah was different from Emily in many ways. Where Emily was introverted and contemplative, Sarah was outgoing and spontaneous. She had an infectious laugh and a way of seeing the world that made even the most ordinary moments feel extraordinary. She didn't just fill the void that Emily left, she brought new light into my life. One night, after a particularly long day at work, Sarah suggested we go to a live music event at a local bar. I was exhausted, and my first instinct was to decline, but her enthusiasm was hard to resist. So we went. The bar was packed, the air thick with the smell of beer and sweat, but the energy was electric. The band played a mix of blues and rock, and I found myself relaxing, enjoying the music and the company. It was a simple thing, but it felt like a turning point. I realized I could still find joy in the world, that there was still life to be lived. Work continued to be demanding, but I had learned to set boundaries. I no longer stayed late every night, no longer brought work home with me. My boss, Tom, noticed the change and commented on it one day. "You seem different, Dan. Happier, I think. Whatever you're doing, keep it up," he said with a smile. Tom was a good boss, understanding and supportive. He had been a mentor to me since I started at the firm, and his approval meant a lot. I told him about Sarah, and he gave me a knowing look. "She sounds like a keeper. Don't let work get in the way of that," he advised. Tom's words stuck with me. I had made the mistake of letting work consume me before, and I wasn't going to let that happen again. I started making more time for Sarah, for my friends, and for myself. I picked up old hobbies that I had abandoned, like playing the guitar and hiking. It felt good to rediscover these parts of myself. Dear viewers, I ask you to subscribe to the channel under this video. I will be very grateful to you. One weekend, Sarah suggested we go on a road trip. She had always wanted to see the Grand Canyon, and she thought it would be a fun adventure. I was hesitant at first. A road trip seemed like a big step, but the idea of spending uninterrupted time with her was appealing. So we packed up my car and hit the road. The trip was everything I needed. We laughed, we sang along to the radio, and we talked about our dreams and fears. Standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, looking out at the vast, awe-inspiring landscape, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if the canyon was a metaphor for my life, immense, complex, and full of hidden depths. Sarah and I grew even closer on that trip. She opened up about her past, her own struggles and heartaches. It made me realize that everyone has their own battles, their own scars. It wasn't just about me and my pain. It was about finding a way to move forward, together. When we got back to Chicago, things between us felt different, stronger. I started to think about the future in a way I hadn't before. I could see myself with Sarah, building a life together. But I was still cautious, still afraid of getting hurt again. Around this time, Emily reached out to me. She wanted to meet, to talk. I was hesitant, but I agreed. We met at a coffee shop, a neutral place where I felt comfortable. She looked different, older somehow, and there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking about you, about us," she said, stirring her coffee absently. "I'm sorry for everything, Dan. I never meant to hurt you." I didn't know what to say. I had spent so long being angry, blaming her for everything that had gone wrong. But looking at her now, I just felt tired. "I've moved on, Emily," I said finally. "I'm happy now, or at least I'm trying to be. I think it's best if we both just let go." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand. I just needed to say it. I needed you to know." We parted ways that day, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was as if by forgiving her, I had finally freed myself from the past. I could truly move on. With Emily no longer a shadow over my life, I felt more open to the possibilities of the future. Sarah and I continued to grow closer, and I found myself thinking about what it would be like to marry her, to start a family together. It was a scary thought, but also an exciting one. One evening, as we were walking along the lakefront, I turned to her and said, "I love you, Sarah. I know I've been through a lot, but I want you to know that I see a future with you. I want us to build something together." She smiled, her eyes sparkling in the fading light. "I love you too, Dan, and I'm here. Whatever the future holds, we'll face it together." It wasn't a grand proposal, but it was honest and heartfelt, and that was enough for both of us. As the months went by, we started to make plans. We talked about moving in together, about traveling, about what we wanted from life. It wasn't always easy. We had our disagreements, our moments of doubt, but we worked through them, always coming back to the understanding that we were in this together. I continued to see my therapist, working through the lingering effects of my past. It helped to have someone to talk to, someone who could help me make sense of my emotions. I learned a lot about myself, about my patterns and habits, and I worked on breaking the ones that were holding me back. Sarah was a constant source of support. She encouraged me, challenged me, and believed in me. With her by my side, I felt like I could face anything. One day I got a call from Tom. He wanted to talk to me about a new project, something big that the firm had landed. It was a high-profile bridge design, and he wanted me to lead the team. It was a huge opportunity, one that could take my career to the next level. But it would also mean long hours, a lot of travel, and immense pressure. I talked it over with Sarah. We weighed the pros and cons, and she was supportive either way. "I know how important your career is to you, Dan, and I'll support you no matter what you decide. But just remember to take care of yourself too." Her words stayed with me. I realized that while my career was important, so was my personal life, my happiness. I decided to take the project, but with the understanding that I would set boundaries, that I wouldn't let it consume me the way work had in the past. The project was challenging, but also incredibly rewarding. I worked with an amazing team, and we created something that I was truly proud of. And through it all, I made sure to make time for Sarah, for my friends, and for myself. As the project came to a close, I reflected on how far I had come. From the depths of betrayal and heartbreak, I had rebuilt my life, found love again, and achieved new heights in my career. It wasn't a straight path, and there were plenty of bumps along the way, but I had made it. Sarah and I celebrated the completion of the project with a trip to Napa Valley. We toured vineyards, tasted wine, and enjoyed the beautiful scenery. It was the perfect way to unwind and reconnect. One evening, as we sat on the porch of our rented cottage, watching the sunset, I turned to her and said, "Sarah, I can't imagine my life without you. You've been my rock, my inspiration, my everything. Will you marry me?" She looked at me, tears in her eyes, and nodded. "Yes, Dan. 1,000 times, yes." We got married in a small ceremony with close friends and family. It was a beautiful day, filled with love and joy. As we stood there exchanging vows, I felt a sense of peace and happiness that I had never known before. Our life together has been full of ups and downs, but through it all, we've faced it together. We've built a home, started a family, and created a life that we're both proud of. I've learned that while the past can shape you, it doesn't have to define you. It's what you do with the present, how you choose to move forward, that really matters. Looking back, I see that Emily's betrayal was the catalyst for so much growth and change. It was painful, yes, but it forced me to reevaluate my life, to find out what really mattered to me. And in the end, it led me to Sarah, to a life that I wouldn't trade for anything. So that's my story. It's not perfect, and it's not always pretty, but it's mine. And I'm grateful for every moment of it, the good and the bad, because it's brought me to where I am today. And for that, I wouldn't change a thing.